Before we begin, make sure to hit that subscribe button and smash the like so you never miss a single story that will keep you on the edge of your seat. You do not want to miss what happens next in this unbelievable true tale. When the wine glass shattered against her cheekbone, the silence in the Callahan mansion was so deep it seemed to press in from the velvet walls. The ruby stain spread across the pristine linen, dripping from Clara Evans' jaw onto her expensive silk dress. She did not scream. She did not even blink. In that split second, as her husband Adrian's hand trembled above the remains of the crystal, the air crackled with a tension thicker than any storm rolling in from the San Francisco Bay. No one spoke. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs so violently she wondered if he could hear it, too. The faces around the table, San Francisco's elite, tech titans, old money wives in pearls, stared, frozen between concern and calculation. No one would dare intervene, not here, not with Adrian Callahan's name on their investment portfolios and his charities printed on every society page. His eyes flashed as he hissed words only Clara could hear, his voice a low, lethal snarl that sliced through her composure like broken glass. You made me look like a fool. In front of them. My money, my rules. Clara held the napkin against her burning face, but her mind was already moving at lightning speed. This was not the first time. Not by a long shot. Yet tonight felt different. Something inside her shifted. The humiliation, the cold shock of betrayal, all the invisible wounds from years of whispered threats and isolation, suddenly, they began to crystallize into something else. Resolve. She scanned the table. Mia Chin, her old friend from Berkeley, the only guest who held her gaze with something like real worry, flicked her eyes at Clara's wine-stained hand, her brow furrowed in silent warning. Clara steadied herself. All the other guests quickly found a reason to look away, clinking glasses, dabbing at invisible crumbs, pretending not to notice as the Callahan household staff glided silently to clear the mess. The party, like all the others, would go on. Adrian would pour another round, dazzle the room with his stories, and later scold Clara for daring to question him about the missing millions in their joint account. She would apologize, like always, for the sake of peace. She would clean up the mess, patch the wound, smooth her features for the photos and the city's watchful eyes. But tonight, as Adrian announced a toast and forced her to stand beside him, Clara smiled for the cameras while inside her soul something cold and hard snapped into place. Later that night, while the city below glittered in ignorance, Clara lay in bed, staring at the intricate shadows dancing across the ceiling. Adrian's soft snores filled the space between them. He had left the party in high spirits, the scandal wiped clean, but the words he spat at her in the car home still rang in her ears. Everything you have is mine. Never forget that. You'd be nothing without me. He believed it, just as he believed no one would ever dare cross him. As Clara lay awake, the ache in her cheek faded to a distant throb, but the fire in her chest only burned brighter. She replayed every detail of the evening, Mia's warning glance, the flash of a camera, the cold brush of the stemware against her skin. In those images, she saw her past self, hopeful, naive, always bending, always forgiving. And she saw her future, sharp and shining, if she only dared to seize it. She got up. She went to the walk-in closet, the place Adrian called her princess cage. Among rows of designer dresses and perfectly aligned shoes, she found the small lockbox she had kept for emergencies. In it were old photographs, a college diploma, and, most importantly, the business card Mia had once slipped into her hand when they reconnected at a gallery opening. If you ever need a way out, Mia had said, call me. I mean it. Clara gripped the card, her knuckles white. Her breath shook as she imagined what it would mean to leave everything behind, the mansion, the status, the world she had built from scratch and the persona she had so carefully worn. But she remembered the way Adrian's voice had turned venomous, the emptiness behind his eyes, the taste of humiliation on her tongue. Dawn was still hours away, but in the darkness, Clara made a decision she knew would change everything. She would not be a victim. Not anymore. She sat at her vanity and stared into the mirror. For a moment, she barely recognized herself, the delicate lines beneath her eyes, the tightness in her jaw. She was still beautiful, yes, but there was a new hardness in her reflection, an edge she had never seen before. That edge would become her shield. In her mind, she began to sketch her escape, details, logistics, risks, and the allies she would need. She would be smart. Careful. She would play the game, just as Adrian always had. Only this time, the rules would be hers. And as the first pale light crept over the city skyline, Clara Evans took her first breath of freedom, even as her prison doors still stood closed. The Callahan mansion would awaken soon. The city would expect the wife to smile and serve and keep her husband's secrets. But Clara had already crossed a threshold. There was no turning back. And as the sun spilled gold across the bay, she whispered into the empty room, "You will never see me coming." The revenge of Clara Evans had just begun. The city never truly sleeps. San Francisco pulses with a million private stories, most hidden behind glass and steel, and now Clara Evans' secret life had begun. Each morning, she played her part flawlessly. She greeted Adrian at breakfast with a practiced smile, brushed her fingers across his sleeve as the staff delivered his coffee, listened with apparent rapture to his stories of boardroom victories and, idiot, competitors who could not match his genius. He never noticed her distance, or if he did, he assumed it was another silent apology. Clara's days blurred into a performance, but every free moment was spent plotting. In the hush of Adrian's home office, she learned to move soundlessly, copying files onto a slim flash drive she wore as a pendant. The bank statements revealed patterns, buried wire transfers, offshore accounts, the kind of money that could ruin reputations if ever made public. Her architectural mind, trained for details, made quick work of connecting dots Adrian never thought to hide. She started to keep a coded notebook, writing at night by the light of her phone. She cataloged every slight, every threat, every dollar that disappeared. The evidence grew, a digital web of deception, financial crime, and power games. Mia Chen was her silent partner. Late at night, Clara would text a string of numbers to an untraceable app. Mia's responses were always short and crisp, "Keep going. Trust no one. I'm here." Yet as Clara built her case, she also rebuilt herself. She joined a yoga class in the city, then switched to Krav Maga after watching a woman half her size toss a man to the mat with frightening efficiency. Clara felt something like pride when her own bruises bloomed purple across her arms. Each lesson was a secret gift to her future self, a promise that next time Adrian tried to grip her wrist or raise his voice, she would not be powerless. But the mask was exhausting. At charity events and tech galas, she smiled at the cameras, played the doting wife, her laughter ringing out as if nothing was wrong. Meanwhile, Adrian paraded her like a prize, whispering possessive things into her ear and bragging about her beauty to men he barely respected. Sometimes, Clara caught the knowing glances of other wives, women who recognized the signs but would never risk their place to help her. In those moments, she burned with loneliness. One afternoon, as fog rolled in thick and cold from the bay, Clara slipped out of the mansion on the pretext of a spa appointment. Instead, she ducked into a tiny print shop in the Mission District, a place no one in their social circle would be caught dead. The owner, a cheerful woman with tattooed arms, copied and bound a stack of documents with no questions asked. Clara paid cash and stashed the bundle in a library drop box. Each step was rehearsed, each risk calculated. Still, she was not without fear. Adrian's network was vast. The security cameras, the household staff, anyone could be a spy. Her phone, her emails, even her private journals could be compromised. Sometimes, in the quiet after midnight, Clara would lie awake and imagine her plan unraveling, Adrian's fury unleashed, the end of everything. But then she would remember the sting of wine on her face and the gleam in Mia's eye, and her resolve would harden. At times, the old Clara resurfaced, full of doubt and longing. She would linger at the window, watching the city lights flicker, remembering the man Adrian had pretended to be, the laughter, the warmth, the promises whispered beneath velvet sheets. She would almost convince herself to stay, to wait for things to get better. Then, inevitably, Adrian would return, drunk on power, and remind her with a careless word or a cruel glance just how small he believed she was. The weeks stretched on. Clara's double life became her only reality. She practiced escape routes in her head, which doors were fastest, where the cameras were blind, what to grab if she had only 60 seconds. She memorized phone numbers, Mia, the safe house, a trusted car service. She opened a secret bank account in her maiden name, moving money in amounts too small to attract attention, selling designer shoes on consignment, each sale a silent act of defiance. Her greatest fear was that Adrian would see through her, that some slip, a nervous laugh, a mistyped code, an unexplained expense, would tip him off. He was not stupid. His gaze, when it lingered, could be sharp as broken glass. One night, after a tense dinner with investors, he pressed her against the marble kitchen counter and searched her eyes for too long. "Are you hiding something from me, Clara?" His voice was soft, dangerous. She held his gaze and shook her head. "Just trying to be perfect for you," she whispered. He smiled then, smug and satisfied, believing the lie. But after he left, she scrubbed her hands raw, willing herself not to shake. That night, she added one more line to her notebook. "He will never see me coming." In her next meeting with Mia, held in the back of a crowded bakery, Clara handed over the latest flash drive and a list of names she had uncovered, shell companies, trusted associates, lawyers who had made things disappear. Mia's eyes widened at the depth of Adrian's crimes. "You're almost ready," Mia murmured, her voice barely above the hum of the espresso machine. "But not yet. We need one last thing." Clara nodded. She was patient. This was more than revenge, it was a resurrection. When she returned home that evening, Adrian was waiting. He beckoned her into his office, his voice unusually gentle. She braced herself as he handed her a velvet box. Inside was a diamond necklace, colder than ice, heavy in her palm. "For you," he said, his smile dazzling, his eyes dark and searching. "I want the world to know how much I cherish my wife." Clara slipped the necklace on, feeling the chill against her skin, and smiled for him, for the cameras, for everyone but herself. Inside, she was counting down the days. The hunt had begun. The facade of wealth and glamour grew heavier with every passing day. Clara Evans perfected the art of invisibility within her own life, blending into the glittering backdrop of San Francisco's social elite, her movements as precise and quiet as the city's morning fog. She had learned to listen more than she spoke, storing away the whispered secrets and stray bits of gossip that slipped between flutes of champagne and the clink of fine china. What no one realized was that Clara was no longer the naive architect dazzled by privilege. She was now a silent observer, collecting every thread that might someday unravel the web around her. Adrian's attention drifted in waves. Some nights, he was the doting husband, pressing his lips to her temple in view of guests, spinning her through charity ballrooms, showing off his radiant wife like a trophy he could never quite trust to stay on the shelf. Other nights, the mask dropped. He would stalk into their bedroom after a failed meeting or a tanking stock, the air thick with his disappointment and unspoken rage. Sometimes, he would say nothing at all, just watch her from the doorway, eyes cold and hungry for submission. Clara learned to hold his gaze without flinching, never giving him the satisfaction of her fear. Yet she could feel the walls closing in. Adrian's paranoia was growing. He changed the household staff without warning, installed new security cameras, and began questioning her with sharp, idle curiosity. "Who did you see at the club today?" "Did you stop anywhere after Pilates?" he would ask, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Each query was a test, a search for the weakness in her story. She answered smoothly, weaving mundane details into a tapestry of perfect normalcy, but inside, her nerves twisted tighter with each exchange. Clara became more careful, sharpening her instincts to a razor's edge. She changed her routines, using ride shares instead of the driver, taking random turns through the city before slipping into the Mission District to meet Mia. She developed a code. A casual message about almond croissants meant the drop was safe, a mention of rain signaled danger. Mia responded in kind, her text a lifeline in a world where trust was as rare as mercy. Mia's own investigation was yielding results. The shell companies tied to Adrian's name led to offshore accounts and silent partners, some of whom had ties to politicians and well-known tech giants. Clara listened in awe as Mia explained how Adrian had funneled millions through real estate, donations, and startup investments, laundering his money while appearing to uplift the community. With every detail, Clara saw more clearly the monster behind the mask, a man who believed himself untouchable, even as his empire rested on rot. Still, the biggest risk remained exposure. One afternoon, while gathering receipts from a locked drawer, Clara caught the faintest sound behind her, the whisper of socks on hardwood. She spun, heart in her throat, to find Adrian's new assistant, Mark, standing in the doorway. He smiled, too wide. "Mr. Callahan wanted to remind you about the gala on Thursday. He said to wear the sapphire dress." Clara nodded, keeping her voice even. "Thank you, Mark. I'll remember." When he left, she felt a cold sweat trickle down her spine. She wondered how much he had seen. Every day, it seemed, a new pair of eyes tracked her movements. Her only refuge was Dr. Emily Rogers, her therapist. Each session, she shed her armor and let the truth spill out. Emily was gentle, probing without prying, helping Clara untangle the trauma and self-doubt that Adrian had planted inside her. Under Emily's care, Clara began to recognize her patterns, her instinct to minimize, her habit of apologizing for breathing too loudly, her shame over failing to see Adrian for what he was. Emily taught her to fight those lies with facts. "You survived. You are not weak. You are not alone." But Clara's isolation was real. She could not trust her family, who saw only her privilege and questioned her sadness. She could not trust most friends, who lived too close to Adrian's world. Only Mia and Emily knew the truth, and that truth grew heavier by the day. At the next charity event, Clara felt Adrian's hand tighten around her waist as photographers snapped away. His grip was almost painful, a silent reminder of who held the power. But when the flashbulbs faded and the crowds dispersed, Clara slipped into the shadows, her face calm, her mind racing. She had noticed a strange man at the edge of the ballroom, a man in a cheap suit, watching her with a hungry curiosity that made her skin crawl. When she turned to look again, he was gone. That night, Adrian was in a foul mood. He grilled her about a missing watch, about a call from his accountant, about why she had lingered by the garden with Mia after dinner. Clara answered each question with calm precision, her pulse steady, her voice smooth. She was learning to fight him with his own weapons. Still, the close call haunted her. What if Adrian had set a private investigator on her? What if her secret account had been discovered? Clara doubled her precautions, changing passwords, using burner phones, leaving decoy clues to throw off suspicion. Each act was a gamble. Each day could be her last in the house she once called home. But the closer she drew to danger, the more certain she became. Adrian was not invincible. He was not even especially clever, just reckless, surrounded by people too afraid to challenge him. All it would take was a single mistake on his part, one slip, and the whole structure would tumble down. Late one evening, Mia called her from an untraceable number. "We found something big," she whispered, urgency in her voice. "You need to get out." Soon. Clara pressed her forehead to the cold glass of the bedroom window. The city stretched out below, glittering and oblivious. Her heart thudded with a wild mix of fear and hope. Tomorrow, everything could change. But tonight, she had to survive. One last performance, one last lie, one more night under Adrian's watchful gaze. The storm was building. She could feel it in the air. And as she slipped into bed beside her enemy, Clara knew that the world she had known was about to be shattered, not by a wine glass, but by the truth she would unleash. It was the night the city held its breath, the annual Callahan Foundation Gala, a spectacle draped in sapphire and silver, where San Francisco's most powerful gathered not to give but to be seen giving. The ballroom at the Regency Palace Hotel glittered with crystal chandeliers and silk banners. As Clara Evans stepped out of the black car and into the paparazzi's glare, she felt the chill of destiny in the air, sharper than the midnight blue silk of her gown. Adrian's hand settled on the small of her back, his smile flashing for the cameras, but his whispered words coiled around her ear like poison. "Remember, Clara, tonight you belong to me." She nodded, her face the perfect mask. Every detail of the night had been orchestrated to show Adrian's dominance, the dress he chose, the earrings he presented with a possessive kiss, even the script he handed her for her brief speech. He was daring her to misstep. Inside, Clara's nerves hummed with electricity, but her plan was already set in motion. In her clutch was not only her lipstick and phone, but a tiny flash drive, encrypted, loaded with evidence Mia had painstakingly compiled. Tonight was the night she would make the first move. As guests arrived in waves, Clara glided through the room, exchanging pleasantries, accepting praise for the decor she had personally overseen. She found herself locked in small talk with the city's kingmakers, always aware of Adrian hovering nearby, always within earshot. The man in the cheap suit appeared again, lingering near the bar, pretending to study the silent auction items. When their eyes met, he nodded just once. Clara's heart skipped, but she did not approach him. This was Mia's contact, a last line of protection should things go wrong. The speeches began. Adrian took the stage first, charming and eloquent, painting himself as the city's savior. Clara stood beside him, her hands steady, her features calm. When he introduced her, she stepped up to the microphone, her voice clear, the words rehearsed but carrying a current of something deeper, strength, defiance, a glimmer of her true self breaking through the mask. Applause thundered. Adrian squeezed her hand so hard she felt the bones grind, but she did not flinch. Later, as guests spilled onto the dance floor, Clara slipped away to the coat check room. The attendant, a college student Mia had hired, offered a nervous smile and turned away, pretending to adjust a row of cloaks. Clara knelt and retrieved a plain manila envelope from behind the third locker. Inside, the second half of the evidence, bank statements and wire transfers tying Adrian to crimes that went beyond white-collar theft. Her heart pounded as she tucked the envelope beneath the lining of her coat. If anyone searched her tonight, she would lose everything. Adrian appeared suddenly, his shadow falling over her. "You disappeared," he said, his eyes narrowed. "Is there something I should know?" She summoned a smile. "Just freshening up. The night is long." His gaze lingered, searching for cracks. Then, with a brittle laugh, he leaned in, his voice thick with menace. "Do not embarrass me, Clara. Not tonight. I have eyes everywhere." The words echoed as she rejoined the crowd. For the next hour, Clara danced with donors, laughed at the mayor's jokes, toasted to progress. She was everywhere and nowhere, her mind calculating each movement, each conversation, searching for signs of Adrian's suspicion. Finally, it was time for the silent auction to close. As people crowded around the displays, Mia appeared at Clara's side, her face cool, her voice barely above a whisper. "The car is ready. When you're done, head for the service exit. Take only what matters." Clara nodded, her pulse thundering in her veins. There would be no return from this moment. As the last song drifted through the speakers, Adrian beckoned her toward him. He was flushed, triumphant, certain of his control. "Let's have a final dance, for the cameras." She let him lead her into the center of the floor. Around them, lights flashed and faces blurred, the world closing in like a noose. Adrian's hand gripped her waist, tighter than ever. He leaned in, his lips brushing her ear. "Smile, Clara. Remember who you belong to." She smiled, dazzling and empty, and as the cameras flashed, she leaned closer, her own voice velvet and cold. "This is the last time you will ever hold me." He frowned, the mask slipping for a single heartbeat. But then the music swelled, and the moment passed. When the dance ended, Clara drifted away. She found Mia in the shadows and handed her the flash drive. Mia squeezed her hand, a promise of safety, of new beginnings. Clara turned, retrieved her coat, and walked briskly toward the service exit. No one tried to stop her. Outside, the air was biting cold. The city sparkled, indifferent to the drama playing out in its heart. Clara slid into the waiting car, the envelope pressed to her chest, the memories of the night already fading behind her. As the car sped away, she looked back at the hotel, its windows blazing with light. Somewhere inside, Adrian was searching for her, but for the first time, he would not find her waiting. The escape had begun. And the night of the sapphire dress would be remembered as the moment when everything started to unravel. The city flashed past in a blur of neon and headlights as Clara Evans pressed her forehead against the cold car window, every muscle in her body trembling from adrenaline and the giddy terror of freedom. The driver, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a baseball cap pulled low, met Clara's gaze in the mirror and gave a single nod, Mia's final assurance that she was in safe hands. Behind them, the Regency Palace faded into the distance, swallowed by the city that had once been her golden cage. Clara's hands clutched the envelope beneath her coat as if it could anchor her to reality. Inside were the final pieces of evidence, names, account numbers, proof of Adrian's crimes meticulously gathered over months of deception and courage. In her purse, her phone vibrated, a coded message from Mia, a single word. "Safe." She tried to breathe, but it felt as though the air in her lungs was borrowed, fragile, and fleeting. For a few blocks, the driver took a winding, labyrinthine route, doubling back, cutting through alleys, watching for headlights that followed too closely. Clara kept her head low, heart hammering as every shadow on the street felt like it might conceal one of Adrian's men. When the car finally pulled to a stop in front of a nondescript apartment building in Hayes Valley, Clara hesitated before stepping out. Her hands shook as she shouldered her small overnight bag, the weight of her past life pressing down on her. The building was old but well kept, the front door secured with a new digital lock, a place Mia's team had vetted and stocked with essentials. The anonymity was suffocating and exhilarating at once. Here, she could become invisible, even if only for a few days. The apartment inside was sparse. A twin bed, a chipped kitchen table, fresh towels in the bathroom, a phone already programmed with 3 numbers, Mia, Dr. Emily Rogers, and a private investigator known only as Fisher. Clara set down her bag and moved through the rooms like a ghost, every sense heightened by fear. She double-checked the locks, peered through the curtains at the quiet street below, then finally let herself collapse onto the bed, clutching a pillow to her chest. Sleep was impossible. Her mind replayed the gala in slow, agonizing detail, Adrian's hand at her back, the cold menace in his whisper, the moment she finally walked away. Every memory was edged with the knowledge that her freedom was fragile, easily shattered by a single mistake or betrayal. She rehearsed the story she would tell if anyone found her. She replayed Mia's instructions. She waited for the inevitable text from Adrian, a barrage of rage, confusion, threats. Instead, there was only silence. The next morning, the city greeted her with rain. Clara sat at the kitchen table, nursing a mug of instant coffee, when the phone rang. She answered with a trembling voice, relief washing over her as Mia spoke. You did it, Mia said softly. The data's been delivered. Now we wait for Fisher's report. You're safe. For now. But safety was a delicate illusion. The news spread quickly through the city's social circles. Clara Evans had disappeared from the gala, the Callahan Foundation was scrambling for damage control, and Adrian Callahan had locked himself away in his penthouse, unreachable and fuming. There were rumors, illness, scandal, a lover's quarrel, none close to the truth, but each one tightening the net of curiosity and suspicion. Clara's isolation grew heavier by the hour. She ventured out only at odd times, covering her hair with a knit cap and moving with the practiced caution of prey. She bought groceries at a 24-hour bodega, eyes scanning for anyone who lingered too long by the door. Even Dr. Rogers came to her, using the side entrance, bringing comfort and therapy in hushed tones over mugs of peppermint tea. Yet, Clara's new world was not free from shadows. Twice, she caught sight of a black sedan idling down the block, its windows tinted. Her phone buzzed with calls from unknown numbers, each one sending her pulse skittering with dread. Sometimes, in the deep of night, she would jolt awake, sure she heard footsteps on the fire escape. She learned to sleep lightly, a kitchen knife tucked beneath her pillow. But beneath the fear, something else was growing, a defiant, simmering anger. Adrian's empire was trembling, cracks spreading from the evidence she and Mia had unearthed. Fisher's text grew more urgent. He knows you're gone. His lawyer's calling everyone. He's making mistakes. Stay dark. Clara watched the news as reports of federal investigations surfaced, vague hints at financial misconduct and missing funds in Callahan's companies. Adrian's face flashed on the screen, all confidence and bravado, but his eyes were wild with panic. The press speculated about his marriage, his wealth, his sudden withdrawals from public life. Clara almost pitied him, almost. The days bled into each other. Clara used the solitude to heal, filling her journal with the truth she'd never spoken, calling Dr. Rogers when the nightmares came too close. She practiced self-defense moves in the narrow living room, remembering Mia's lessons, replaying every detail of her plan. Then, on the 7th day, a package arrived, no return address. Inside was a burner phone and a single sheet of paper, an address, a time, and 2 words written in Mia's neat hand. Be brave. Clara's breath caught in her chest. She read the note again and again, heart pounding. The instructions were clear. Tonight, she would meet Fisher and Mia face to face, and the final stage would begin. As darkness fell, Clara changed into black jeans and a sweater, tucking her hair beneath a cap. She pocketed the burner phone, her nerves taut, her resolve unbreakable. She left the apartment without looking back, slipping into the misty city as it swallowed her footsteps. The night was alive with possibilities, danger humming just beneath the surface. For the first time, Clara felt not only the terror of being hunted, but the fierce hope of a woman who has nothing left to lose, and everything left to fight for. The city had turned on Adrian, the empire he'd built beginning to rot from the inside. And Clara, for the first time, was not running. She was coming for him. Rain fell in silver sheets as Clara moved through the tangled streets of the Mission District, her every sense sharpened by purpose and fear. San Francisco pulsed with energy around her, neon glowing in puddles, the distant wail of sirens, the hum of a city that never really slept. She followed the directions from the burner phone, ducking through alleys slick with rain, avoiding well-lit corners, watching for the glint of headlights that lingered too long. She had never felt so exposed, and yet, every step toward the rendezvous marked a new victory over the panic that once paralyzed her. The meeting spot was an abandoned bakery on the edge of a construction lot, its windows fogged with years of dust and neglect. Clara pressed her hand to the door's warped wood. It opened with a groan. Inside, the darkness seemed to wrap around her, but then a sliver of light appeared, Mia, flashlight in hand, her face drawn but resolute. At her side was Fisher, a tall man with a faded army jacket and a gaze as sharp as broken glass. He nodded at Clara, no words wasted. Mia pulled Clara into a quick embrace, her voice a fierce whisper. "We do this together now. You're not alone." Fisher wasted no time. He unfurled a battered laptop, pulling up spreadsheets, emails, a mosaic of evidence that mapped Adrian's criminal dealings like veins in marble. Offshore accounts, bribed officials, fraudulent charities, threats and payoffs, all tied together by threads Clara and Mia had gathered at great personal risk. "Adrian's losing control," Fisher said. "He's trying to move money, but the feds are watching. You hit him harder than you know." Clara stared at the screen, her hands trembling as the scale of it all came into focus. This wasn't just about her anymore, it was about every person Adrian had crushed or blackmailed on his climb to the top. "Are we safe?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Safe enough," Fisher replied. "But he's desperate. Desperate men are dangerous." Mia's phone buzzed with encrypted updates, agents in place, prosecutors reviewing the files, the media circling like vultures. "It's happening, Clara. But you need to stay dark a little longer. No interviews. No contact with anyone outside this room. We can't risk him tracking you down." The hours blurred together in a haze of tension and strategy. Mia coached Clara through what would come next, the press storm, the court dates, the threats from Adrian's remaining loyalists. Fisher outlined security procedures, new protocols for every movement, safe houses and backup plans if things went wrong. Clara absorbed it all, exhaustion warring with adrenaline. She had never imagined a life like this, but now it was the only way forward. At one point, as the rain lashed the windows, Clara broke down. The weight of years spent living under Adrian's thumb, the terror of his rage, the pain of betrayal, it all came pouring out. Mia held her, whispering reassurance, while Fisher stood watch by the door, unflinching. When Clara's sobs faded, she felt lighter, her resolve renewed by the knowledge that she was not alone. "You did what no one else dared," Mia told her. "You fought back. That makes you dangerous to him." Outside, dawn was creeping over the city. Fisher gathered the documents and made a call. "They're ready," he said. "Time to make it official." Clara followed Mia to a waiting car, its back seat shielded from prying eyes. As they drove through empty streets, Mia explained the final steps, handing over the evidence in person to federal investigators, testifying under a new name, living under protection until the trial was done. Clara's entire world had shrunk to this mission, but her spirit had never felt more alive. They arrived at a federal building just as sunlight pierced the rain clouds. Mia walked beside Clara, never letting go of her hand. Fisher disappeared inside, re-emerging moments later with two agents in crisp suits. Everything moved quickly, signatures, questions, an oath to tell the truth, the surrendering of every last piece of evidence that would seal Adrian's fate. Clara gave her statement in a small, sterile room, her voice steady as she described years of control, cruelty, and the crimes she'd uncovered. The agents listened, nodding, their faces grave but kind. One offered her a cup of tea, his gesture simple but deeply human. When it was over, Clara stepped outside to breathe in the cool, clean air, the weight of secrecy finally beginning to lift from her shoulders. Mia hugged her tightly. "This is the turning point. We're not out of danger, but you did it, Clara. You did it." As they drove back to the safe house, Fisher monitored the news on his phone. The headlines were already changing, investigation launched into Callahan Empire, whistleblowers' testimony shake city's elite. Clara's name was protected, her identity hidden, but the ripples of her actions were spreading across San Francisco like a tide. For the first time since her escape, Clara felt hope burn within her. She had allies now. She had a voice. And as the day broke wide open before her, she knew that Adrian's world was starting to crumble, not in darkness, but in the full light of morning. But she also knew this was only the beginning. The hardest battles were yet to come. And Clara was finally ready to fight. San Francisco awoke to chaos. The Callahan scandal had detonated across every major headline, Adrian's pristine reputation unraveling in the public eye. As sunlight danced on the bay, the city's elites scrambled to distance themselves from the man who had once held them in thrall. In the penthouse above Market Street, Adrian Callahan raged in isolation, his phone erupting with calls he could no longer control. Every morning's news delivered a fresh wound, frozen assets, cancelled deals, subpoenas from authorities who had, until now, been his silent allies. In her hidden apartment, Clara Evans watched it all unfold with a strange, hollow sense of vindication. She barely recognized the gaunt figure Adrian had become in the photographs, his arrogance replaced by wild-eyed panic, the smooth mask shattered by fear. Still, the news brought her little comfort. Safety was fragile. Every day she moved between safe houses, escorted by Fisher or Mia, learning to disappear in plain sight. She wore thrift store clothes, colored her hair, lived with a bag always packed by the door. Every text from Mia was coded, every phone call brief and urgent. Yet, the more the world learned of Adrian's crimes, the greater the danger for Clara. She became the invisible target of both Adrian's wrath and those desperate to silence her. She discovered a listening device taped beneath a borrowed car's dashboard, removed in seconds by Fisher, whose calm never wavered. Once, someone tried to force the safe house's back door in the middle of the night. Clara, clutching the kitchen knife, froze until the police lights flared outside. No one was arrested, but the message was clear: Adrian still had loyalists. Through it all, Clara felt herself hardening, changing. Fear was still there, but so was an iron resolve. Dr. Rogers, the trauma specialist, came every week, teaching Clara how to breathe through panic, how to reclaim her own thoughts from nightmares. "You are not powerless," she whispered, "no matter what the world tries to make you believe." The words became a mantra Clara repeated with every uncertain sunrise. But nothing prepared her for the day Adrian finally broke his silence. It began with a letter, hand-delivered by a courier who vanished before Fisher could question him. The envelope bore only Clara's new initials. Inside, on expensive stationery, Adrian's handwriting spiked across the page. His words were a mix of rage and desperate manipulation, threats to expose her past, to destroy anyone who sheltered her, to drag her back if she did not recant. But beneath the bluster, Clara saw the truth: he was losing his grip, and fear had finally replaced his old confidence. She read the letter to Mia, her hands steady. "He's cornered," Mia said. "And men like Adrian are most dangerous when they have nothing left to lose." That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She wandered the tiny apartment, replaying every moment of her life with Adrian, every warning sign she'd ignored, every humiliation she'd endured for the sake of a love that had always been a transaction. In the quiet, she found a strange peace, a sense that her story was finally hers to tell, her pain no longer a secret weapon for someone else to use. The next morning, the authorities called. "We need your testimony again," said the agent, his tone gentle but insistent. "Adrian's defense team is fighting hard. We need to be stronger." So Clara dressed in borrowed clothes and rode in the back seat of Fisher's battered car, her world reduced to a series of coded handshakes and side entrances. She took the stand in a stark, wood-paneled room, her face shielded from the press, her name recorded under seal. She answered every question, her voice clear even as her hands shook beneath the table. The prosecutor's eyes were kind, but Adrian's lawyer was a viper, hurling accusations, digging into her past, twisting her words. Clara did not break. She told the truth, about the years of manipulation, the evidence she had gathered, the network of threats and bribes that ran through Adrian's empire like poison. The cord hung on every word. When she finished, the judge thanked her with a nod that spoke of respect and understanding. Afterward, Clara sat in a small waiting room, trembling with relief and exhaustion. Mia found her there, holding out a cup of tea. "You did it," Mia said. "You held the line." The rest of the day blurred. More news crews at the courthouse steps, more rumors about Adrian's imminent arrest, more messages from strangers offering support or demanding silence. Fisher stayed close, his presence a shield against the world's noise. That night, Clara slept for the first time in weeks. No nightmares, no sudden jolts awake, just the steady rhythm of a heart that had learned to keep beating, no matter the storm outside. And as the city's masks continued to fall, revealing the rot that had festered beneath the surface for years, Clara understood the power of truth. She was no longer just a survivor, she was the architect of Adrian's undoing. The final act was approaching. The world was watching. And Clara Evans, reborn from the ashes of betrayal, was finally ready to take the stage. The city was restless as the trial entered its most brutal phase. A cold wind howled off the bay, rattling windows in courthouse corridors and echoing the tension that gripped every corner of San Francisco's elite. Adrian Callahan's empire, once untouchable, was under siege, his businesses gutted by investigators, his allies melting away under the glare of subpoenas, his name spat in boardrooms that used to beg for his favor. For Clara Evans, life had narrowed to a relentless routine. Each morning began before dawn with a new location, sometimes a faceless hotel, sometimes the back bedroom of an ally's apartment, always with the uneasy knowledge that Adrian's reach might still find her. Fisher handled every movement with military precision, running surveillance sweeps, changing routes, using coded phrases on burner phones. Mia was a constant voice in the shadows, texting encouragement and tactical updates, reminding Clara she was never truly alone. But isolation was corrosive. As the trial grew more heated, the outside world felt impossibly distant. Clara's few moments of calm came during therapy with Dr. Rogers, whose steady presence anchored her to reality. Together, they confronted the trauma head-on, the nightmares, the guilt, the waves of shame that sometimes threatened to drown her. Dr. Rogers pushed Clara to remember not only the pain but the acts of courage, every document she had smuggled, every time she had stood her ground, every piece of the puzzle she had risked her life to reveal. Yet the enemy was always close. Adrian's defense team waged psychological warfare, leaked rumors to the tabloids, veiled threats delivered through anonymous notes, sudden knocks at safe house doors in the dead of night. They painted Clara as a gold digger, a liar, a vengeful ex. Her credibility was dissected in headlines, her character assassinated by talking heads who had never known the truth of Adrian's cruelty. It took every ounce of Clara's newfound resilience not to let the whispers destroy her. She clung to the encouragement of Mia and Fisher, to the kindness of prosecutors who shielded her from the worst attacks. Late at night, she scribbled in her journal, pouring out the story as she wanted it to be remembered, not as a cautionary tale, but as a battle cry for anyone who had ever been trapped by power and fear. Inside the courtroom, the air was electric with anticipation. Adrian himself appeared every day, a shadow of his former self, shackled and sullen, eyes burning with a hatred that seemed to promise revenge. When Clara took the stand again, she refused to look away. She spoke of secret recordings, of emails sent at midnight, of accounts hidden in shell companies from the Caribbean to Zurich. The evidence was overwhelming, but the tension was unbearable, every cross-examination a minefield, every word a potential weapon. As the defense tried to rattle her, Clara drew on the lessons she had learned in the darkness: breathe, focus, never let them see you falter. She thought of the women who would watch her testimony on the news, searching her face for signs of hope. For them, she did not break. Not even when Adrian's lawyers sneered that she would be forgotten when the story was over. Outside, the city seethed with gossip and rumor. Protesters gathered at the courthouse gates, some hurling insults, others holding signs in support. Anonymous emails flooded Clara's phone, some filled with threats, others with thanks. Fisher set up digital shields, changing passwords daily, rerouting all her accounts. But one night, Clara woke to the sound of breaking glass, a rock through the window of the safe house, a note taped to it in Adrian's handwriting, "You're nothing without me." Terror threatened to engulf her, but rage flared hotter. She called Mia, voice steady. "I won't run again. I'll finish this." Mia's reply was immediate, "You're not alone. We're ready for whatever comes." The next morning, Mia arrived in person, Fisher at her side, both carrying fresh files from the investigation. "We've got him," Fisher said quietly. The last witness flipped. Adrian's old CFO. He gave us the codes and the emails. There's no escaping this now. Relief and dread mingled in Clara's veins. The end was close, but Adrian's hatred was a storm gathering just beyond the horizon. As the final week of the trial began, Clara prepared herself for whatever might come, a last desperate attack, a smear campaign, or the bitter taste of public vindication. In the quiet of the safe house, she stared at the city lights, heart pounding, body exhausted. She thought of the first night she left the palace, trembling with fear and uncertainty, and compared it to now, a woman forged in the fire of betrayal and survival, stronger than she had ever dreamed. Tomorrow would bring the verdict. Tomorrow, the world would see the real Adrian Callahan. But tonight, Clara was not afraid. The battle was nearly over. And she was still standing. The morning of the verdict dawned cold and bright, sunlight slicing through the fog as San Francisco held its collective breath. Outside the courthouse, a storm of reporters, protesters, and onlookers crowded the marble steps, their voices a restless wave of speculation and anticipation. News vans jammed the curb, cameras pointed toward the doors, ready to beam the outcome into every home and boardroom in the city. The Callahan scandal had become more than a trial, it was a reckoning for the entire elite, a spectacle of justice grinding through the gears of power and corruption. Inside, Clara Evans sat in a private room with Mia and Fisher, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Fisher watched the hallway, every muscle tense. Mia offered silent support, squeezing Clara's hand whenever her nerves threatened to unravel. The walls seemed to hum with tension, every footstep in the corridor a possible harbinger of news. Clara wore a simple black dress, her hair tucked beneath a scarf, as anonymous as she could manage while still feeling like herself. She stared at the clock, each tick dragging the moment closer. The bailiff knocked once and ushered them into the courtroom, now packed to capacity. The gallery was a sea of faces, press, victims of Adrian's schemes, curious strangers, and those who had once dined with him in glittering towers. Adrian sat at the defense table, surrounded by lawyers, his expression carved from stone. He looked smaller now, his power stripped away, the sharp suits and easy arrogance replaced by a nervous rigidity. For a moment, his eyes met Clara's across the room, full of fury and something almost like fear. The jury filed in, their faces grave. Clara's heart hammered in her chest. She remembered every sleepless night, every threat, every moment she had doubted herself or the point of fighting. Now it all condensed into a single moment as the judge asked, "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreman stood, hands trembling only slightly. "We have, Your Honor." The courtroom held its breath as the verdicts were read, guilty, 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 each word reverberating through the chamber like a bell tolling at dawn. Adrian Callahan was convicted on all counts: fraud, racketeering, conspiracy, abuse. It was done. For a heartbeat, the room was silent, the collective tension stretched to the point of snapping. Then the wave broke, gasps, sobs, applause, the furious shouts of Adrian's last defenders. The judge rapped for order as Adrian was led from the courtroom, his face ashen. Clara sat frozen, unable to process the reality of it. She watched as the man who had ruled her life for years was taken away in handcuffs, the clank echoing in her memory. Mia threw her arms around Clara, laughing and crying at the same time. You did it. You really did it. Fisher nodded, his usual reserve softened by a rare smile. It's over, he said. He can't hurt you anymore. But Clara barely heard them. The sound of her own heartbeat, wild and free, filled her ears. She could finally breathe, as if for the first time in years. The aftermath was a blur. Prosecutors thanked her for her courage, victims she had never met pressed her hands in gratitude, and reporters shouted questions she was not ready to answer. Fisher shielded her from the crowd, hustling her through back corridors to a waiting car. Outside, the city was alive with reaction, some still defending Adrian, others celebrating his downfall. Clara watched the headlines scroll by on Fisher's phone, each one confirming the impossible: the empire had fallen, and the survivor had won. Back at the safe house, Clara collapsed into a chair, exhausted to her bones but lighter than she had ever felt. Mia made coffee, Fisher locked the doors, and for the first time in months, the world seemed quiet. It will never be the same, Mia said softly, handing Clara a mug. Not for you, not for anyone he hurt. Clara nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks, the reality of freedom finally settling in. But there was one last meeting to come, the sentencing, the final confrontation, the moment when Clara would face Adrian one last time. She knew what she wanted to say. She knew what it meant to close the door on the past for good. For tonight, she sat with her friends in silence, letting the relief and exhaustion flow through her, savoring a peace she had thought she might never know again. The verdict had echoed across the city, across the country, across every hidden corner where power once went unchecked. The storm was breaking. And Clara Evans, scarred but unbroken, was ready for the dawn. The day of sentencing arrived shrouded in a winter chill, gray clouds pressing low over the city, the air charged with anticipation and the quiet threat of rain. San Francisco's skyline blurred behind the courthouse windows as Clara Evans stood before her reflection, adjusting the collar of her navy coat, heart pounding with a strange mixture of dread and finality. Mia waited nearby, her supportive gaze steady, while Fisher made quiet calls from the hallway, confirming the security detail one last time. Outside, the courthouse was besieged by the press, cameras flashed, microphones thrust toward every figure who passed through the doors. For the public, today marked the end of a saga that had gripped the city for months. For Clara, it was the day she reclaimed the final piece of herself from Adrian's shadow. She moved through the crowd in a cocoon of calm, the lessons of trauma and survival anchoring her step with every stride. The courtroom was colder than she remembered, the harsh fluorescent lights unflinching, the rows of benches packed with journalists, victims, and silent onlookers who hungered for closure. Adrian Callahan was already seated, flanked by guards, shackled hands resting on the table. His once immaculate suit was replaced by a standard-issue jumpsuit, his eyes hollow and unblinking. As Clara took her seat, she felt his gaze flicker over her, resentment and fear mingling in the set of his jaw. The judge's voice rang out, crisp and measured, recounting Adrian's crimes and the suffering he had caused. Victims stood to give statements, their voices trembling as they spoke of ruined savings, shattered trust, broken lives. Some glared at Adrian, others simply wept. When Clara's name was called, she rose with hands only slightly shaking, her heart pounding in her throat. All eyes turned to her, but she felt oddly detached, as if watching herself from somewhere distant and safe. She spoke simply, about the years she lost to manipulation and fear, about the courage it took to leave, and about the hope she now felt for herself and for others like her. She did not beg for vengeance, nor did she speak of hate. Instead, she spoke of the strength it takes to survive, and the duty to shine light on darkness, so that others might one day find their own escape. The words fell softly but carried through the chamber, a testimony to the power of resilience and truth. When she finished, she turned to Adrian at last. Their eyes met, hers steady, his flickering with something close to recognition. "You no longer have any power over me," she said quietly. You never will again. Adrian flinched as if struck, the last vestiges of his old arrogance flickering and dying behind his eyes. The judge delivered the sentence with finality: decades behind bars, all assets forfeited, restitution ordered to the victims. Adrian's jaw tightened, but he did not speak. The only sound was the shuffling of chains as he was led away, his gaze never quite meeting Clara's again. Clara returned to her seat, breathless, every muscle trembling with release. Mia wrapped her in a hug, Fisher squeezed her shoulder, and a wave of relief, so sharp it was almost painful, washed through her. The crowd began to disperse, and with it, the last echoes of Adrian's influence seemed to drain from the room, replaced by the gentle murmurs of new beginnings. Outside, the clouds broke and sunlight spilled through, golden and bright, illuminating the courthouse steps as Clara emerged to a city forever changed. Reporters shouted her name, but Fisher shielded her, leading her to the waiting car where Mia was already inside, tears of pride in her eyes. As the car pulled away from the courthouse, Clara watched the city slide past, the familiar streets, the distant hills, the endless expanse of water. She had faced her demon, spoken her truth, and emerged not as a victim, but as a woman wholly her own. The scars would never fully fade, but neither would the strength she had found. That night, surrounded by friends in the warmth of her new apartment, Clara allowed herself to celebrate at last. She toasted to freedom, to survival, to the future, her future, written now in her own words, on her own terms. The final encounter was over. The chapter closed. And outside, the world was finally, achingly, beautifully new. For the first time in years, Clara Evans woke without fear. Sunlight drifted through the curtains of her small, sun-drenched apartment overlooking the bustling street below. The world felt impossibly open, alive with possibility. She lay in bed a few minutes longer, savoring the quiet, no threats looming, no footsteps in the hallway to make her flinch, just the soft hum of city life and the reassuring voices of Mia and Fisher drifting from the kitchen. Mia was already making breakfast, humming an old jazz tune, while Fisher sat at the table with his laptop, scanning news headlines and checking security out of habit rather than necessity. The trial had ended, the danger had passed, but the routines of survival lingered, a reminder of the road Clara had traveled. As she joined her friends, the warmth of their easy companionship filled the kitchen, erasing shadows that had once seemed permanent. The days that followed were a whirlwind of restoration. Messages flooded in from supporters and survivors, some grateful for Clara's courage, others emboldened to seek justice for themselves. There were invitations to interviews, advocacy panels, podcasts. At first, Clara hesitated, uncertain if she wanted to keep reliving her ordeal for strangers. But Mia encouraged her to see it differently. "You're not just telling your story," she said. "You're changing the way people think about power, about survival, about what it means to start over." Gradually, Clara found her voice. She spoke at local women's shelters, sharing hard-earned wisdom with those just beginning their fight. She partnered with advocacy groups, helping draft new legislation for victims' rights. The law firm that once represented her invited her to consult on future cases. Bit by bit, Clara transformed her pain into purpose, shaping a legacy that extended far beyond her own healing. Still, freedom was an adjustment. The silence of her new apartment at night felt too wide at first, the absence of fear almost foreign. She took up painting again, filling canvases with color and light, images of bridges, open windows, vast Pacific skies. She built new rituals, small moments of self-care and celebration, a cup of tea at sunrise, a walk through Golden Gate Park, dinners with Mia and Fisher in the laughter-filled kitchen. One afternoon, while visiting a local bookshop, Clara ran into an old friend from her former life, a colleague who had known only the carefully constructed mask she once wore. There was a brief, awkward pause before the friend embraced her, tears in her eyes. "You're brave," she whispered. "I wish I had seen what you were going through." Clara hugged her back, realizing how much she had changed, not just in circumstance, but in spirit. Seasons shifted. The city's wounds slowly healed as Adrian's crimes faded from front-page news. Occasionally, Clara's story would resurface, a new documentary, a legal update, an anniversary feature. She no longer shied away from her name in print. She read the words with pride, knowing she had earned every line. Yet, for all the public attention, Clara's greatest victories were private and quiet. She no longer startled at every loud sound. She trusted herself to set boundaries, to choose her company, to savor her own company. The future no longer terrified her, it thrilled her. On a warm spring night, she stood on her apartment balcony, watching the lights of the city flicker on. The air was fragrant with blooming jasmine, the streets alive with possibility. As Fisher and Mia joined her, glasses in hand, Clara smiled. To freedom, Mia toasted, her eyes shining. Fisher nodded, his rare grin stretching wide. Clara raised her own glass, heart swelling with gratitude, for the courage that had carried her through, for the friends who had never let go, for the world that finally felt like hers. The shape of freedom, Clara realized, was not the absence of scars or memory, but the ability to choose joy, to build anew, to live without apology or fear. The pain of the past was not erased, but it was no longer the whole story. As midnight approached, Clara leaned against the balcony rail, watching the city's heartbeat in 1,000 points of light below. The journey was not over. There would be more challenges, more healing, more moments of doubt. But she faced them now with open eyes, an open heart, and the knowledge that she had claimed her place in the world. Tomorrow would come, bright and unpromised, and Clara Evans would greet it on her own terms, no longer a shadow, but the author of her own future. The first light of dawn crept over the rooftops, brushing the city with strokes of gold and rose as Clara Evans stood at her window, watching the new day unfold. The quiet was soft and profound, the kind of silence that followed storms and signaled not emptiness but possibility. She breathed it in, savoring the simple act of being alive and unafraid. Today felt different, like the start of a life she had only dared to imagine when fear was her constant companion. She moved through her morning with gentle purpose, lingering over her coffee, letting the warmth seep into her hands. The scars of the past were still there, faint reminders woven into the fabric of her life, but now they felt more like marks of survival than of pain. Clara dressed simply, choosing colors that made her feel both grounded and free, and stepped out into the world with her head held high. The city had changed, but so had she. Her days found rhythm in the small joys of daily living, long walks through tree-lined streets, hours spent volunteering at shelters, late-night talks with Mia about dreams for the future, and the shared silences with Fisher that spoke of trust rebuilt and loyalty proved. She found herself approached on the street, sometimes by strangers who recognized her story. Some offered thanks, others sought advice, a few simply wanted to share their own burdens for a moment with someone who would understand. Through it all, Clara listened. She offered what she could, but never lost herself in the telling. For every painful memory, there was a story of hope, of growth, of kindness exchanged in moments both grand and humble. She learned to let go of guilt, to forgive herself for the years lost, and to cherish the present with all its imperfections. Work became a source of pride again. She partnered with advocacy groups, helped survivors find resources, and began to write, slowly at first, then with growing confidence. Her articles found a wide audience, and soon publishers came calling. It was in her words that Clara found the power to shape not just her own future, but to help others see a way forward. Each story she shared was a beacon for someone else in the dark. Mia and Fisher remained steadfast at her side, their bond deeper now for everything they had endured together. The three of them carved out a new definition of family, one built not on obligation or blood, but on choice and unwavering support. Dinners at Clara's apartment became a ritual, laughter ringing through rooms that once echoed with solitude. On the anniversary of the verdict, Clara stood on the steps of City Hall and spoke to a crowd gathered to honor survivors of abuse and injustice. The city had changed, its heart a little softer, its eyes more open to the suffering hidden behind closed doors. Clara's words carried not just the story of her own survival, but a call for others to rise, to demand justice, to claim their right to joy. As the sun set on that day, painting the sky in brilliant hues, Clara felt a peace she had never known. The old fears no longer held power over her. She was not merely what had been done to her, nor the pain she had endured, but the life she had built from those ashes, stubborn, bright, and unbreakable. Night settled gently over the city, and Clara stood on her balcony once more, heart full and gaze fixed on the endless horizon. She knew there would still be challenges, days when doubts crept in, moments when old wounds ached. But she also knew she would never again face them alone or in silence. A new sunrise waited beyond every darkness. And this time, Clara Evans would step into its light, certain of her worth, ready for whatever wonders or storms the future might hold. Her story would go on. But the ending, at last, belonged entirely to her.